I never thought a simple after-class conversation could change everything in my life. It started on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day when most students rush home, heads down, avoiding puddles. But I stayed behind. Mrs. Carter, or Emily, as I would learn to call her much later, was my literature teacher. She had that kind of presence that made every guy in the room sit up a little straighter. Tall, elegant, with a confidence that seemed unshakable, she wore her age like it was her greatest advantage. Rumor was she was in her late 30s, but no one could be sure. She carried herself in a way that made guessing seem both dangerous and thrilling. I was 18, just finishing my last year before college. I wasn't the top student, but I wasn't failing either. My grades in her class hovered just above average, mostly because I found it hard to focus on the poetry and novels when she was the one reading them aloud. Her voice was smooth, controlled, and every word she spoke seemed to hold some hidden meaning. That day, she'd asked me to stay after class. "Ethan," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, "we need to talk about your last essay." I sat in the chair across from her desk, pretending to be calm, but my heart was beating too fast. She slid my paper across the desk, lots of red ink, notes in the margins. "You have potential," she said, leaning forward, "but you don't push yourself. I can see you holding back." I laughed nervously. "Maybe I just don't get Shakespeare." Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she was trying to read something more in my words. "It's not about Shakespeare. It's about expression. About being willing to put your thoughts out there, no matter how risky." Something in the way she said risky made the air between us change. She stood up, walked around the desk, and leaned against it right in front of me. Her skirt brushed the edge of my knee. "You're 18 now, aren't you?" Yeah." "Good. Then maybe it's time you stop being afraid of expressing yourself." She smiled, but it wasn't the usual polite smile she gave students. This one felt personal, like a secret we were suddenly sharing. The rain outside made the room feel even more closed in. I could smell her perfume, subtle, expensive, and intoxicating. "Tell you what," she said. "If you're willing to meet me here after hours twice a week, I'll help you with your writing. But I don't teach like everyone else." "What do you mean?" "You'll see." Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer than necessary, then she straightened up and walked back to her desk. "Think about it, Ethan. If you want to take the lessons, come back tomorrow at 6. Don't be late." I left the classroom in a daze, not sure if I was imagining the tension or if something real had just happened. The next day, I showed up. The school was quiet, most of the lights already off. When I reached her classroom, the door was unlocked. I stepped inside and saw her sitting on the edge of her desk, wearing a fitted black dress and heels. "You came," she said softly, as if it was a test I'd just passed. I nodded. "Good. Let's start." Instead of handing me a book, she handed me a leather-bound notebook. "This will be yours. But I'm not going to give you writing prompts like some high school assignment. I want you to write about what you notice. About people. About me. About yourself. Nothing is off limits. About You? I asked, my voice catching slightly. Yes. In detail. What you see, what you think. No filters. No worrying about what's appropriate. She tilted her head, watching my reaction. I opened the notebook to the first blank page, my palms already sweating. I started writing something about her dress, her posture, the way her hair framed her face. She came closer, reading over my shoulder. Good, but be braver. Don't just describe what you see, write what it makes you feel. Her voice was low, deliberate. For the next hour, she pushed me not just in writing, but in noticing things I'd never let myself put into words. By the time we finished, my head was spinning. When I stood to leave, she touched my arm lightly. Same time next week. And Ethan, you're doing well. Her hand lingered for just a moment before she let go. As I walked home that night, the rain had stopped, but my mind was a storm. The following week, the lessons grew stranger. She started locking the door once I arrived. She'd stand close as I wrote, sometimes touching my shoulder, sometimes walking behind me so I could smell her perfume and hear the faint click of her heels on the floor. One evening, she gave me a scene to write, a fictional one, she said. 2 characters in a room, both wanting something they weren't supposed to have. She told me to make it as vivid as possible without ever saying the forbidden words outright. When I finished reading it aloud, she looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled. Better, she said. Much better. I didn't know it yet, but those lessons were only the beginning. The next few weeks became a ritual. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 6, I'd walk into her classroom, the halls echoing with my footsteps, the building otherwise empty. Mrs. Carter always had the door slightly open, as if she knew exactly when I'd arrive. She had a way of making every lesson feel more like a game than schoolwork. Some days she'd have me write descriptions of her movements, her voice, her smile, forcing me to notice things I'd never dared to before. Other times, she'd ask me to imagine scenarios, a conversation in a dimly lit bar, 2 strangers on a train, a quiet apartment where every word carried weight. And always, she would push me. Don't be safe, Ethan. Safe is boring. Say what you really want to say. I didn't always know what I wanted to say, but I knew I wanted her attention. And she gave it fully, deliberately, in a way no one else did. One evening, she was different. She wore her hair pinned up, glasses perched on her nose, a fitted navy blouse and skirt that stopped just above her knees. The outfit was formal, almost strict, but the way she carried herself made it anything but ordinary. She placed 2 cups of tea on the desk. Tonight, you're going to read to me. She handed me a book, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I'd never read it, but the way she said the title made it sound like something dangerous. I started reading, and she sat across from me, listening without interrupting. But I could feel her watching me, not just hearing the words, but measuring how I spoke them. Halfway through the chapter, she stopped me. Slow down. Let the words breathe. Make them heavier. I tried again, my voice lower, the pauses longer. She smiled faintly. Better. Now, Imagine you're reading this to someone who already knows what's going to happen, but they want to hear how you'll say it. There was an unspoken challenge in her eyes. At the end of the session, as I gathered my things, she said, "You're improving fast. I'm impressed. But I think you need a different kind of stimulus." Stimulus? Yes. She smirked. "You can only learn so much from me alone." I frowned, unsure what she meant. "Next week," she said, "I'm bringing someone to join us." I spent the next few days distracted in class, at home, even when I tried to hang out with friends. Who was she bringing? Another teacher? A friend? Someone my age? When Thursday finally came, I arrived early. The door was closed, but I heard voices inside. One was hers. The other was lighter, more playful. I knocked softly. "Come in," she called. I stepped inside and froze. Sitting on the desk next to Mrs. Carter was a woman I'd never seen before. She looked younger, mid-20s maybe, with loose, wavy hair and a confident grin. She wore a leather jacket over a simple dress, legs crossed casually as if she owned the place. "Ethan, this is Claire," Mrs. Carter said. "She's a colleague of mine." Claire tilted her head, studying me like I was part of an experiment. "So this is the student you've been telling me about?" Heat rose to my face. "Don't be shy," Mrs. Carter said. "Claire is here to help with your development." Claire hopped down from the desk, walking slowly toward me. "Emily says you're talented, but a little too cautious. I'm here to fix that." Her perfume was sweeter than Mrs. Carter's, lighter, but just as distracting. That night, the lesson took a different shape. They had me sit at a desk while they both stood at the front of the room, tossing questions at me, quick, unexpected, sometimes absurd. "What's the first thing you notice about someone when they walk into a room?" Claire asked. "Their eyes." "Too easy," she said. "Try again." "The way they carry themselves," I said after a pause. "Better," Mrs. Carter said. "Now describe Claire's posture right now." I swallowed, glancing at her. "Confident. Relaxed. Like she's not afraid of being watched." Claire smiled. "Good. And what about Emily's?" I hesitated, then said, "Controlled. Precise. Like, everything she does is on purpose." "Excellent," Mrs. Carter said softly. The questions kept coming, and I realized they weren't just about words, they were testing how quickly I could observe, how honest I could be without stumbling. By the end of the hour, I felt strangely exhilarated. When I stood to leave, Claire handed me a small slip of paper. "Homework," she said. "Describe the difference between how we make you feel. In detail. Bring it next time." Mrs. Carter's eyes glinted with approval. I walked out into the night, my heart racing not just from what had happened, but from what might be coming next. The next lesson was going to change everything. I spent the weekend working on Claire's homework. It was harder than I thought. Describing them both without sounding like a fool took hours. Mrs. Carter was discipline, elegance wrapped in control, every gesture calculated. Claire was unpredictability, a flash of wild energy, ready to break the rules just to see what would happen. When Tuesday came, I walked into the classroom with the notebook in my hand. The door was already closed. Inside, both women were waiting. Mrs. Carter sat at her desk, legs crossed, glasses perched on her nose. Claire leaned against the wall, idly twirling a pen between her fingers. "Let's hear it," Mrs. Carter said without preamble. I read aloud. My voice shook a little, but I pushed through. Claire's smile widened as I described her, especially when I said she had the kind of presence that makes you lean forward without realizing it. Mrs. Carter's eyes never left mine when I spoke about her quiet dominance that fills the room. When I finished, silence hung for a moment. "Not bad," Claire said. "But I think we can push you further." Mrs. Carter stood. "Tonight, we'll test your focus." They arranged the desks so I was sitting in the middle of the room, facing them both. Mrs. Carter began pacing slowly, her heels clicking on the floor. "Your task is to describe what you see. Every detail. But," she glanced at Claire, "we'll make it harder for you to concentrate." Claire smirked. "I'll go first." She started moving around me slowly at first, then with little bursts of unpredictability. She'd pause just behind my shoulder, then step around to the front, leaning in just close enough that I could smell her perfume. She tapped her pen against the desk, ran her fingers lightly along the edge of my notebook, then stepped away again. I tried to write, my words growing messy as my heart pounded. Mrs. Carter replaced her, her movements more deliberate. She would stop directly in front of me, waiting in silence until I noticed the way her hands rested on her hips, the way her gaze held mine without wavering. Every second felt like a test I couldn't afford to fail. After 20 minutes, they switched tactics. "Now," Mrs. Carter said, "you'll write about both of us at the same time." Claire sat on the desk to my left, Mrs. Carter to my right. Their voices came one after the other: questions, instructions, challenges. "What do you notice about the difference in how we look at you?" Claire asked. "Whose approval do you want more?" Mrs. Carter added. It was impossible to answer without revealing too much, and maybe that was the point. When I finally set my pen down, my pulse was still racing. Mrs. Carter picked up the notebook, skimming my words. A slow smile formed on her lips. "You're learning to notice more quickly. And to take risks." Claire leaned closer. "Good. Because your next assignment will require both." She handed me an envelope. "Don't open it until you're home." That night, I tore the envelope open on my bed. Inside was a single piece of paper. Thursday. 6 p.m. Wear something that makes you feel confident. No excuses. No other explanation. Thursday felt like it would never come. When it did, I walked into the classroom and immediately knew this wasn't going to be like the other sessions. The desks were pushed to the sides. A single chair sat in the middle of the room. The blinds were half closed, casting long shadows across the floor. Mrs. Carter and Claire stood together at the front. "Sit," Mrs. Carter said. When I did, Claire circled behind me, resting her hands lightly on my shoulders. Mrs. Carter crouched down in front of me, her eyes level with mine. "Tonight," she said softly, "you won't just write. You'll follow our instructions exactly." Claire's fingers tightened slightly. "And if you hesitate, we'll know." The room felt warmer, smaller. I could hear my own breathing, and theirs. Mrs. Carter straightened, her voice calm but firm. "This is about control, Ethan. About trust. About letting go of the need to decide what happens next." Claire's voice came from behind me, playful yet sharp. "We'll take turns. You'll respond to both of us, no matter what we ask." I swallowed hard. "What if I don't?" "You will," Mrs. Carter interrupted, with a faint smile. And just like that, the assignment began. The chair in the middle of the room felt more like a spotlight than a seat. I sat there, hands resting on my knees, trying not to fidget. The air was thick, not hot exactly, but heavy in a way that made every breath feel intentional. Mrs. Carter stood a few feet in front of me, arms folded, watching. Claire circled slowly behind my chair, the click of her boots echoing softly in the empty classroom. "This," Mrs. Carter began, "is about your ability to stay present, even when we control the pace." Claire leaned down beside my ear. "And we will control it." I swallowed, the sound too loud in the silence. They started simply giving me words to repeat. Mrs. Carter's instructions were deliberate, precise. "Say it slowly. As if you mean every syllable." Claire's were quicker, teasing. "Faster. Like you can't wait to get it out." The two styles clashed, but somehow that was the point, forcing me to adjust, to obey without hesitation. After a while, the commands changed. "Look at me," Mrs. Carter said. I did. "Now don't look away, no matter what happens." I kept my gaze locked on hers. Behind me, Claire's hands rested lightly on my shoulders. Then she began to move fingertips, brushing along my upper arms, pausing at my elbows, trailing back again. It wasn't overt, but it was distracting enough that my concentration wavered. Mrs. Carter noticed. "Focus." I did my best, but Claire's presence was everywhere, the sound of her breath just over my ear, the faint pressure of her hands, the warmth that lingered after she moved away. "Now," Mrs. Carter continued, "describe us both." Out loud. My voice came out rougher than I expected. You're calm. Controlled. Every move feels like you've already thought 3 steps ahead. Claire is unpredictable. Closer 1 second, farther the next. She makes me nervous in a good way. Claire grinned. I like that answer. They switched positions. Claire moved in front of me, tilting her head, studying me like I was an object in an art gallery. Mrs. Carter stood behind, her hand briefly resting on the back of my chair. Who has more power right now? Claire asked. I hesitated. Answer, Mrs. Carter's voice came from behind me, softer, but somehow more commanding. You both do, I said. But in different ways. Claire smiled. Clever. The rest of the lesson blurred into a series of moments, one giving instructions, the other disrupting them, one leaning in close, the other pulling my attention away, both making sure I never fully knew what was coming next. By the end, my pulse was racing, my head light, like I'd run a race without moving an inch. As I stood to leave, Mrs. Carter blocked the door for just a second. "Next time," she said, "we won't be in the classroom. I want you somewhere you can't hide behind these walls." Claire's grin widened. "Off school grounds. Our rules still apply." I nodded, though I had no idea what I'd just agreed to. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop replaying it all. The way they moved in tandem and opposition, the way my attention was pulled like a thread between them. Whatever was coming next, it wouldn't be just another lesson. No greeting. No name. Just a note and a folded piece of paper with an address written in Mrs. Carter's neat handwriting. All day, I was useless in class. Every sound, every tick of the clock felt too slow. By the time I finally left home, my hands were clammy and my heart was already beating too fast. The address led me to an apartment building downtown, modern, clean, the kind of place that felt out of reach for most people my age. I took the elevator to the 5th floor and stood in front of a door painted deep red. Before I could knock, it opened. Claire was there, leaning casually against the frame. She wore black jeans and a silk blouse that caught the light when she moved. "Right on time," she said with a smirk. "Good start." She stepped aside, letting me in. The apartment was dimly lit, warm. Soft music played from somewhere in the background. Mrs. Carter stood by the window, a glass of wine in her hand, wearing a dark green dress that fit like it had been made for her. She turned as I entered, her smile both welcoming and calculating. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a chair in the center of the room. I obeyed. Claire closed the door and moved behind me, just like in the classroom. Mrs. Carter walked slowly toward me, heels silent on the carpet this time, her movements unhurried but purposeful. "This is a different kind of lesson," she said. "No school rules. No walls. Only ours." Claire's voice came from behind me, light but etched. "And the rules are simple. You listen. You answer. You don't hesitate." They began the same way as before: questions, descriptions, commands. But without the sterile walls of the classroom, everything felt closer, realiter. Mrs. Carter would ask me to describe the room, the way the light from the lamp caught the edges of her dress, the faint scent of the wine in her hand. Claire would disrupt me, touching my shoulder, leaning close to ask something entirely different, making my words stumble. It was a constant pull between order and chaos, between precision and instinct. At one point, Mrs. Carter sat across from me, her gaze steady. "What have you learned from us?" she asked. "That control can feel different," I said slowly. "That it's not always about who's louder or faster. Sometimes it's about who can hold your attention the longest." Claire grinned from behind me. "And which of us does that better?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Depends on the day." Mrs. Carter's lips curved into the smallest of smirks. "Good answer." The lesson went on until time blurred. When it finally ended, Mrs. Carter stood, her voice calm but final. That's enough for tonight. Claire leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching me. You did better than I thought. Mrs. Carter walked me to the door. This doesn't have to be the end, she said quietly. But whether it continues, that's up to you. I stepped into the hallway, my mind still buzzing, unsure whether I'd just finished something or started something much bigger. And as the elevator doors closed, I realized I didn't want it to be over.